Gloria in excelsis Deo, the greeting of the angels to the shepherds on the first Christmas morning. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men. The message brought to us now, as always on Christmas Day, by church bells from all over the United Kingdom. This year we begin in Cornwall, where the church of St. Keyne sits high up on the west of Truro, and the ring of 8 bells carries to all parts of the city. They're rung twice every Sunday for morning and evening service, but the band of ringers have very different ages and experience. The youngest, Neil Jones, is 12, and the oldest, Arthur Cannon, started ringing at the age of 82. Now, 10 years later, at 92, he is the author of a book about the bells of Cornwall. I think they can best be introduced today by some words from a poem written by a former Bishop of Truro called Cornish Bells. But as we listen to these cheerful words, our thoughts on this Christmas Day will, I'm sure, be with the families of those who died in that tragic lifeboat disaster off the Cornish coast. Ring, Christmas bells of Roseland, in your maddest, merriest glee, from Provost to Penkevel, from the Moon to the sea. O Kenwyn bells, ring far, ring free, ring Gloria tibi Domini. That was Oxford Bob Triples, as if you didn't know, rung by the 8 bells of St. Keynes, Truro. And now we move a little further north to Llandaff in South Wales. The cathedral there stands on one of the oldest Christian sites in Britain. They began building it in 1120, and though it was badly damaged in the last war, it's now been restored to its former beauty. The church has its own guild of change ringers, and some of them are ringing for us this morning. Incidentally, change ringing doesn't mean that the ringers dash madly about pulling on different bell ropes. They stay where they are, and so do the bells. It's the order in which the bells are rung which changes, and often in a most complicated way. 2 members of the guild, John Baldwin and his wife, first met each other in a belfry in Bristol. I've noticed, incidentally, that romance seems to flourish in bell-ringing circles. And now they've passed on their skill to their children, Judith and Simon, who at 17 and 14 are already quite experienced. Well, these ringers are used to hard work because they ring the bells 3 times every Sunday, so they won't mind a bit of overtime this Christmas morning as we listen to the 10 bells of Llandaff Cathedral. 10 bells there of Llandaff Cathedral in Cardiff. And now from Wales to the Midlands, to the centre of Newcastle-under-Lyme in Staffordshire, with brightly lit Christmas trees in the streets. Here, in the ancient tower of St. Giles Church, are the original 8 bells cast at Gloucester in 1732, during the reign of George II, and brought most of the way by canal. The total cost was £296, 9 shillings and threepence. And talking of money, the only lady, Judith Money, is master of the ringers, and of course, she works in a bank. Wearing a blue jersey, pink skirt and gumboots, she leads an experienced band. Robert Anderson, Stanley Riles and Arnold Moore have, between them, been ringing bells for more than 160 years. It sort of gets in the blood. Another ringer is Dennis Pitstow, whose father, Harold Pitstow, has rung at Westminster Abbey for 57 years. In fact, his name is inscribed on one of the bells. We're very grateful for his expert advice with this program over many years. So, with Bob Cooper standing on a box to ring the heavy tenor bell, here's what is known as a touch of Stedman triple, named after Fabian Stedman, the famous Cambridge printer. It means that changes are rung on 7 bells, with 3 pairs of bells changing and the tenor always ringing last. Here then are the original 8 of the 12 bells of St. Giles, Newcastle-under-Lyme. Newcastle-under-Lyme, we go west across the Irish Sea to another Newcastle, this time in County Down, Northern Ireland. St. John's Parish Church nestles at the foot of Slieve Donard, the highest peak of the Mourne Mountains. It was here that Percy French wrote his famous song, Where the Mountains of Mourne Sweep Down to the Sea. St. John's was built in 1832, and so next year it will celebrate its 150th anniversary. To mark the occasion, the parishioners have installed a ring of bells. And because the tower is very small, only 9 feet in diameter, the bells are the lightest ring in Ireland. The only snag was that nobody knew how to ring them. But with the help of the nearby parish of Drumbo, a band of 14 bell ringers has now been formed. In a very short time, quite a high standard has been achieved, as you can hear, from the newest ring of bells ever to take part in this program. peaceful sound of the 6 very new bells of St. John's, Newcastle, County Down, to bring hope for the future of Northern Ireland. Now back across the Irish Sea to a busy parish church a mile or two from the centre of Bolton in Lancashire. St. Peter's, Halliwell, is a Victorian church, and indeed the 8 bells rang a muffled peal on the death of Queen Victoria in 1901. 3 years after that, the present leader of the ringers, John Wood, was born, and he's been ringing the bells now for 56 years. So he should be getting the hang of it. The ringing chamber is rather cramped, and the ringers literally have their backs to the wall. In fact, some years ago, one of them was pulled up in the air on the end of his rope, and on the way down was impaled on a coat hook by his braces. And today's ringers are an interesting mixture of youth and experience. Alan Forrester, for example, has with him his 2 teenage sons, Stephen and Keith. Stephen Johnson is younger still. He's only 11. And the only girl in the band, Bryony Charnock, adds a touch of colour in her red and blue football jersey. Bell ringing, you know, is a tricky business which demands concentration and precision. And the confidence of age and the anxiety of youth are reflected in the faces of the 8 ringers, as we listen now to the bells of St. Peter's, Halliwell at Bolton. The 8 bells of St. Peter's, Halliwell at Bolton, ringing what is known as call changes, when the bells are rung in their natural order from treble to tenor, except when the captain calls for a change. Well, now we go north to the church of the Holy Rood at Stirling, which is over 550 years old and the only church in Scotland still in use to have staged a coronation. James VI was crowned there in 1567. In the early days, there were no clocks or watches, so the bells were used to call the people to work and for any special proclamation. In the end, of course, they fell into disrepair. And only 15 years ago, in 1966, it was decided to restore the existing 4 bells and increase them to the present ring of 6. It is those 6 bells that we hear today from the Church of the Holy Rood at Stirling. 6 bells of the Church of the Holy Rood at Stirling. And now, in a few minutes, we shall hear the Christmas message from Her Majesty the Queen. And I'm sure, like the rest of us, the Queen will remember one day of 1981 with special pleasure. On July the 29th, these bells rang a peal of Stedman sinks of 5,007 changes to celebrate the marriage of the Prince of Wales and Lady Diana Spencer. It was an event unique in our lifetime, and it brought joy, romance, music and colour to millions of people all over the world. The bells of St. Paul's Cathedral are the second heaviest ring of 12 in the land, and the ringers who belong to the ancient society of college youths are among the elite of the bell-ringing world. They have been led for nearly 25 years by John Chilcott, and now they stand in the lofty ringing chamber, pulling on the ropes which lead to the bells 70 feet above. Perhaps you can visualize again that glittering scene as the Prince and Princess came back down the red carpet to the west door and the great crowd outside. In the words of the poet laureate, Sir John Betjeman, in a poem written for the